Hola clase. Vamos a repasar unos conceptos gramaticales que aprendiste el año pasado en Español 2. Los materiales que vas a necesitar es tu Manila Folder, un bolígrafo y marcadores. Pero primero presta atención. Los objetivos de este video son los siguientes. Repasar los pronombres, los indirectos, indirectos y reflexivos. También los verbos que requieren objetos indirectos como verbos gustar. Y el uso de los infinitivos. Vamos a empezar con los pronombres. Last year, you were introduced to both the direct and the indirect object pronouns. Here you have them, and you have what their meaning are. The direct object pronouns, the ones to the right, they replace a direct object in a sentence and answers the question what or who. Whereas the indirect object pronouns, they answer the question to whom or for whom the action of the verb is performed. Here are a few rules to remind you the use of these. Well, let me start with examples. De pequeña, yo sabía que mi abuela siempre tenía dulces. My grandma always had candy. What she had was candy. That is my direct object. If I wanted to replace it in a follow-up sentence, los escondía al fondo de su bolsa. She hid them at the bottom of her bag. Los agrees in gender and in quantity with the direct object replace, which is dulces. Another example, nuestros padres compraban rompecabezas cada vez que iban a una venta de garaje. What our parents used to buy were puzzles. And then the sentence continues to say, pero los escondía. I hid them. Again, it agrees with rompecabezas in gender and in quantity. Other examples is a similar sentence to the first one. Cuando mi abuela venía a nuestra casa, siempre me traía dulces. Here, I used an indirect object pronoun, me. Me traía. She brought candies to me. Ella me los daba en secreto. She gave them to me in secrecy, before my brother found out. Otro ejemplo, cuando mi padre me pedía los rompecabezas, when he asked of me for the rompecabezas, yo se los daba. I would give them to him. Now here note se. I'm no longer using le or les, and that is because a direct object los follows. Therefore, le becomes se. Pronoun placement. No matter what pronoun you're using, the rules are the same. If you have a sentence with one verb, place the pronoun or pronouns before the main verb. But if you have two verbs in a sentence, then you have options. You could either attach it to the infinitive or place it or them before the main verb. Now, please make a note that when you have two pronouns attached to an infinitive, you must add an accent mark to the vowel before the infinitive ending, which would be either an A, an E, or an I. Now, with the present progressives, you learned this last year. Estoy estudiando. The rule is the same. You either place them before estar or attach to the present participle in this case. And you'll see some examples of these on the next slide. We also have compound tenses. And for this one, we use the verbo haber. Now, with compound tenses, we use the past participles and the verb haber. But unlike the progressive tenses, you must include pronouns before haber. Here you have no options. And here I note again that when you have an indirect object pronoun le or les before lo, la, los, or las, le and les becomes se. The sentence structure when working with pronouns is as follows. You have your subject. If you have two pronouns, then it would be your IOP, DOP, then your main verb. If you want to attach it to the infinitive, then it would look like this. The subject, the main verb, an infinitive, IOP, and then DOP. Now, here are some examples of each one of these constructions. I have Fernando, who's my subject. Te is an IOP, and los triciclos would be the direct object. He gives me the triciclos, or he gives them to you. Now, if I replace los triciclos, the sentence would read, Fernando te los da. Now, in a different sentence, attaching the pronouns to an infinitive would look like this. Mi abuela quería comprármela, pero mi padre dijo que no. Comprar is an infinitivo. Me would be the indirect object pronoun, and la would be the direct object pronoun. Note the accent on the A of the infinitive verb comprar. The next concept that you learned and we're reviewing are the verbos reflexivos. You learned this last year when you talked about your daily routines. A reflexive verb is when the object and the subject are the same. It is the same person does as well as receives the action of the verbo. When you work with reflexive pronouns, the subject, the pronoun, and the verb are the same. And here are some examples. The reflexive pronouns are as you see, and it tells you what they mean in English. And here are some examples to that of the sentences, as well as the placement of where the pronouns should be located. And here in the three sentences, you have one verb. Therefore, the pronoun should be in front of the verb. In this case, a reflexive pronoun. Me acuesto, it is I who lays down. Me acuesto agrees. Me quiero acostar. And me estoy, the pronoun, subject, and the verb, they all agree. Now, attaching it to what we call a gerundo, this is a present progressive construction, as we mentioned when reviewing the pronouns. Estoy acostándome, I can attach it to the present participle. Luisa está cepillándose. Again, attached to the present participle, and note the accent on the gerundo. So the accent mark will always be either on an A or an E. Now we could also attach it to an infinitive, as it is demonstrated here. Voy a cepillarme los dientes. Or voy a cepillármelos. Accent again on the infinitive of cepillar. Here's a list of verbos reflexivos that you learned last year. We will be adding these to the Manila folder, and there are more reflexive verbs, and as we face these verbs, then we will keep adding them to the list. So please make sure that you leave some space when adding these verbs to the Manila folder. The last, second to last, is the review for the verb gustar. Gustar in English is to be pleasing to. If we take a sentence like I like Spanish, what we're really saying in Spanish, and it sounds like this in English, would be, to me, Spanish is pleasing. The word order is backwards. You see the indirect object comes first, which is me, then the verb, gusta, and then finally the subject of the verb, which is el español. So the sentence would read, me gusta el español. What is pleasing to me is Spanish. Therefore, gusta has to agree with el español. What is pleasing, or who is this pleasing to? To me, that would be me. Again, these verbs require an indirect object pronoun, And anytime that we want to make clarification or stress emphasis on who does the liking or whatever verb you're using, we use a mí, a ti, a él, preposition a, and then the subject pronoun. Please note how we use a mí and a ti and not yo or tú. Anytime you use a preposition, you never use yo or tú. It's always mí and ti. The others remain the same. So an example of a sentence would be, a los niños les gustaba ir al parque. Now, les agrees with los niños, and gustaba is singular because it follows by an infinitive. De niña, no me molestaban los perros. Again, I'm speaking about myself when I was a little girl, so me is to me. Molestaban in this case is plural because los perros is plural, and the verb must agree with that. The sentence construction is as follows. It's basically broken down in 6 or 5 sections. And to create a sentence, you would choose basically a word from each column. Now, under the verb, note how the verb will either be used in the third person singular or third person plural. So your ending will always be either a or an, e or en. And the verb will agree with the direct object. If an infinitive verb follows, then it would always be singular. It would be an e, a, or e. Here's a list of other verbs like gustar. They follow the same grammatical rule. All of these require an indirect object pronoun. All should be conjugated to third person singular, third person plural. Again, the verb will agree with what is it that hurts or that it's fascinating to the person. So it would be singular or plural only. And finally, these are most of the infinitive constructions that they need to be memorized, really. Anytime you see these constructions, you need to know that an infinitive verb follows. You were introduced to the last 3 last year, antes de, después de, and acabar de in the unit with reflexive verbs. And the others, like tener que, deber de, ir a, those are level 1 constructions. We are going to focus with para, por, and sin with infinitives this year as we move forward. Sin, so you know, is without. Sin pensar, te lo dije. Without thinking, I said it to you. So this is a review of some main concepts you learned in level 2 that I would expect that you practice in your writing, especially since we're going to be focusing a lot on that. Now, with these notes, I would like you to rewrite the paragraph that you translated in class, making the corrections to everything that I marked in red, and bring it to class with you tomorrow. The last slide are the notes. Here is everything that you're going to add to your Manila folder. Include the verbs, like the reflexive verbs, even some of the indirect object pronoun verbs. Include them in your Manila folder. I did not do that, but it would be helpful to you if you have that information and note how you have space under each of the graphs. I hope this review is helpful, and we'll go over the translation again in class Tuesday. So please make sure that you make the corrections and bring it to class on Tuesday.